And the other question we've got is from Anne Brinkamp over in WA. And she says, what are the things you consider when planning the racing season and picking races? Yeah, so I think um, in the past I've had coaches who have just been yes men when it comes to races. I've just thought, oh, I'd love to do this race, and they've just said, yeah, that's fine. Whereas I'm certainly more. I feel like I'm a collaborative coach in that, in terms of training, but we've got to be really conscious of what race we want to, how that race season looks like, or what races to choose from. That comes back, I think, first to like what the goal is. Firstly, what's the objective? Are we wanting to try to qualify for Hawaii, for instance, in triathlon, or are we trying to get points, accumulate points for UTMB for trail running? You know, or are we just trying to do our first half Ironman? And then you work backwards from there, obviously. I know Anne, I mean, I use her for an example. She has a goal time in mind that she wants to break. And so the way that I planned that out, and I thought, all right, well, we want to pick a race that isn't notoriously slow. There are only a handful these days that are notoriously slow. But picking the actual race will depend on her life and what's logistically possible. And then once we've understood that and the athletes, I guess, restrictions or life circumstances around, like work may not allow her to go away for 4 or 8 weeks. But once you've got that race and you've looked at the course, and I think the course has to match the athlete. So if the athlete is looking for a fast time, for instance, and they're like, for me personally, I'm not a great hill climber, so I'd be looking for a flatter course. Whereas someone who's probably more of your physique, you would be fine over hills. Power to weight is no problem. So that comes into it as well. The heat and how the athlete works in the heat is important. And then you work backwards. And once you've set down that race, you definitely work backwards from there and working out the peaks and troughs of the year and how that macro plan would look like. As you've got the base build and peak and then recover and you do that again, you probably can only do, 2 or 3 big blocks in a year that you can expect significant increase in ability. And then how you plan between now to that goal race and what we do in between in terms of races is a really important question, discussion to have. The athlete might want to race a lot, might want to have lots of carrots along the way, and that's fine. Other athletes are just too busy or just don't have the opportunity to do that, in which case you'd probably want to put not necessarily test sets, but you'd want to make sure that you're on track.
Yeah, simulation days.
Correct. Yeah. Not at max, but certainly at race pace or the like. And because as coaches, I think, I was saying to an athlete the other day that we don't want to be surprised by an outcome. If you have a sim day or a race, you should, as coaches, we have a pretty good understanding as to how a race should unfold for that particular athlete, knowing what they've been doing. And even if it's a wonderful result, I think, at least for me, I'm like, yeah, I knew that was like, that's expected.
Yeah.
It's what gets to me, and that's why we have sim races or sim training or simulation training, is that we want to make sure that we're calibrated with the athlete, that expectation that we have is spot on with where they're at that moment. And if it's not, we've got to go back into the data, work out why we didn't expect them to do as well on the run, for example, or why they did much better on the run than we thought. Where was that in that data? And so that's important for the overall objective of the end race. But is that any other like, what else do you consider?
No, I think the only other thing that I would add in there is it depends on how far out the goal race is, but I have some in terms of how many weeks out, I have some pretty, not strict, but some guidelines around when I like to have races with leading into a build. So say if it's a 20-week Ironman preparation or 24-week, which is about 6 months, I like to have something about 4 to 6 weeks out, and then something in about 10 to 12 weeks out. So if there's a race that they can do that's kind of a half distance, if it's an Ironman, then a half distance race or a couple of them. So if there's races that fall in line with that, and the athlete's got the budget and the time to be able to do that, well then there's no better practice than racing.
Yeah, I don't like necessarily races in that last build, whatever discipline it is.
Yeah.
Whether it's running Ironman or Ultraman, for example.
As in like the last.
Yeah,
8
before.
weeks.
Yeah, exactly. For the last 7 or 8 weeks, it's sort of, I find it's all a bit, you're messing with the idea of recovery, and it's all.
Yeah, you got I'll put that in there as well. You got to weigh that up, like will the benefits outweigh the negatives, kind of thing of doing it.
Yeah, and that comes back to the athlete.
Yeah, that's right.
How if they're seasoned,
they've been doing it for 10, 15 years, then
they're going to bounce back pretty well.
Yeah, and they're going to be able to handle things. Yeah, if things don't go 100% as planned.
So I guess there's a myriad of things to consider.
Variables.
And a lot of variables, and the macro plans, as much as they're wonderful as well, and we always do them, they change as well. They're malleable.
Yeah.
And
yeah, there's not many times you get an athlete that has a perfect build and can stick to the macro plan.
Yeah.
To the T, or something out of our control always comes
which
up.
is fine. And we just adapt.
It's life.
That's it.